anyone ever had a bad case of imposter syndrome before? Anybody? Or am I the only one, right? I remember really well. It was so clear. I was at my parents' house the day I received word via email that I had been accepted to the University of Chicago for graduate school. And I had just woken up from a nap, so I couldn't tell if I was dreaming or awake. And it was this weird thing. I got two emails. The first one telling me I had gotten a scholarship. And I thought, what is... Am I reading this? And the second one saying I had been accepted. And I have to confess, the first thing through my mind was, oh, they've made a mistake, right? Like this, they couldn't be talking to me. And that same feeling actually carried into going to the University of Chicago Div School, going there, being there. And when I got there, I realized after a couple months that there were, the ministry program, there were about 13 of us. And as I learned everybody's stories and sort of came to know them, I had these brilliant colleagues and friends. I came to realize that all of us had this. Like every single person in that room sort of said, I don't really belong here, right? I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough to be in this program. This feeling of not being worthy, not being good enough, not being the person that if everybody knew who you really were, right? They wouldn't want you here. That feeling is deep. And I'm sad to say that one of the places that I think that those feelings of shame or not being good enough or not being worthy enough, one of the manufacturing plants of that kind of sentiment in the lives of people in the world is from the church. And I'm not talking about this church. I'm talking about the church at large, organized Christianity, organized religion, right? It seems that sometimes the church has taken it upon itself to be this like machine where we churn out people who are very conscious that they are not good enough, that we are morality police, right? That our job is to point out everybody's sins and all the ways that people are falling short. And that's a really funny job description for the church. Y'all know me. I think that's totally wrong. But it's a funny thing, especially given what we see in today's gospel with Peter. Today, Jesus looks at Peter and says, Simon, son of Jonah, from now on, we're going to call you Peter. And there's the funny thing about that name Peter is that it means rock. So there's a little wordplay on this rock, on this one named Peter, this one named rock. We're going to give the keys to the kingdom of heaven. We're going to build our church, says Jesus. And Peter's a funny person to be the rock of the church, because Peter, if there's anybody in the whole of the Gospel of Matthew who is totally unworthy of the keys to the kingdom of heaven, it's dumb old Peter, right? A couple weeks ago, Peter saw Jesus coming across the water. He's walking on the water and says, Lord, I'll come and join you, and sinks like a stone. What else did he expect? Rock. Next week, next week, Peter is going to have a little conversation with Jesus, and the outcome of that conversation, we'll get there, it'll be next week, but the outcome of that conversation is that Jesus is going to turn around and call Peter Satan. Very nice thing to hear from your boss, right? Get behind me, Satan. And then down the way, right when Jesus needs Peter, in the moment when he is before a whole bunch of people, when Jesus is standing before a trial of people who want to see him dead, just when he needs Peter most, Peter will say, oh, I don't know that guy. And he'll deny knowing Jesus 3 times. If anybody is unworthy to have to pocket the keys of the kingdom of heaven, come on, we could find some better people than Peter, right? But is, I think, completely where we've misread our job description as the church. I think Jesus is deeply intentional in giving the keys to the kingdom of heaven, those pearly gates. I think Jesus is completely correct, or completely in line with what he's always been about in giving them to this unworthy rock, Peter. Because along the journey, Jesus, when faced with the opportunity to go sit and have a meal with all of the right people, all of the worthy people, all of the people who are good and perfect and pure, the scribes, the Pharisees, the chief priests, when given a chance to sit with those people, or a table full of tax collectors and sex workers and people living their lives on the margin of society, Jesus constantly chooses that table over and over and over again, as if this whole nonsense about worthiness is just not a priority of Jesus. So maybe Peter is the perfect person to hold the keys to the kingdom. Maybe he is exactly the person we need. I mean, you know what you can do with a rock when you have a gate, right? You can hurl it at the gate, true. That would be okay with Peter. But you can also take that rock, you can open the gate with those keys, and you can take that rock and you can just wedge it in, right? I think Peter is selected here to be the rock on which the church is built, because he makes an awfully good door jamb. Right? What if that was our job description as the people of God? Not to be a place where we're manufacturing shame or unworthiness, but to simply be a door jamb. What would the world look like? What would we look like if the gates of the kingdom of heaven were always known to just be wide open? This, I think, is the aim of God. That God's delight, known in Jesus, that God's grace, that God's forgiveness, that God would want so deeply for that grace, forgiveness, mercy, love to be ours, that God would select the dumbest rock to just place in front of that gate and say, don't ever close these doors. Because anybody who wants in, I want them in, says God. But not just that. I think when the gates of heaven are pinned open by door jamb Peter, I think it makes it possible for God's goodness, God's mercy, God's love, God's delight, God's grace to flow into the world that God so loves. That makes a lot more sense to me than some mythology of Peter being the rock because he's most righteous, most good. I don't buy it, really. That's tremendously permission-giving for a whole bunch of people. Like, if you're like me, and you ever feel like when you show up to church that you know, if everybody knew who you really were, maybe they wouldn't want you here. This is good news for us. That we don't have to live as people with shame heaped up on us. That's not God's desire. God's desire is that the kingdom of heaven's gates would be wide open and that God's mercy would flow. Maybe we should rename the church. What would you all think about this? Door Jam Lutheran Church. We could do worse. Or maybe if there's a St. Peter's out there, maybe we call it St. Door Jam Lutheran Church. That'd be good. We could do a lot worse than to be a place where God encountered, or where we encountered, where the people of God, where the people of this world, where the people of this world that God so loves know that the gates of heaven are open and that the promises of God are theirs. Door Jam Lutheran Church. I like it. Thanks be to God. Amen.